Hi, mining community. Back again with another episode. And today we are speaking to Peter George, who's the Managing Director of Alicanto Minerals, who are an exploration company with a portfolio of historic producing high-grade copper, gold, and polymetallic Skarn and VMS projects located in Sweden. Peter's a mining engineer and a mineral economist by background. And also obviously been background in operations and management, and more recently in sort of more executive positions. And he's going to talk about Alicanto Minerals and what it's like mining in Sweden. So that's welcome Peter to the podcast. How you doing, Peter?
I'm very well, Rob. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. Here in the UK, and you're in Sweden. And as we before we started recording, you mentioned it's your first time in a few years getting over to Sweden. So obviously it's a bit of a new surrounding for you, I suppose, but you can obviously tell us a little bit about that. But first of all, just wondering if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background and your career up to sort of present day.
Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, so as you mentioned, so I'm a mining engineer from out of the School of Mines in Kalgoorlie. Also a mineral economist from Curtin University over there in Perth. Been around a while now. I think I graduated back in '95. Was fortunate enough back in those early days to get an exchange program with Luleå University in Sweden, and I went over there for a year. And also was quite fortunate to get sponsored by Boliden Limited, and did a master's thesis while I was over there, and worked in the Laisvall mine, which is an old closed down room and pillar mine in the foot of the Norwegian mountains, which was quite exciting for a young fella. Went back to Australia for a year, finished off my degree whilst working for Western Mining Corporation out in Kambalda, and then was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to go back to Sweden again for another 5 years. So I came over to Sweden and learned how to speak the lingo again, and worked in their technical department and managed a couple of their big operations over here in Sweden as well. So, which is, I guess, leads into what I've been doing in more recent times. Went back to Australia in the early 2000s. Consulted with a family company, Rapello, for a number of years. Then moved on and worked. Basically, got the spodumene boom started with Mineral Resources. I was in charge of Wodgina operations over there in Western Australia. We got the first boatload of spodumene DSO off to China back in 2017. Did a few other things after that as COO for Keras Resources based out of there in London, which then morphed into Calidus over in Western Australia again. And then in more recent times, obviously, I've been with Alicanto, which I started with back in 2018. With Alicanto's main focus at that point in time was the South American Guyana gold projects that we had over there. I think at the time the board had made the decision that it wanted to move on from South America. I knew the team very well, having been involved in other projects previously, and they asked if I'd come on board as the managing director and look to roll in a number of projects, of which we did. So we started there with the Falun copper gold, silver lead zinc project, very much a greenfield style project, but right next door to a major producing asset that produced over 28 million tonnes at some extremely high grade copper, gold, zinc, lead, and a bit of silver. That was always a greenfields opportunity. We around about this time last year, we came across the opportunity at Sala, which is another very high grade historical producing mine, going back about 500 years worth of production, closed down in the early 1900s, produced over 200 million ounces of silver, and was for all intents and purposes extinct, is what everybody thought. And we picked it up, like I said, a bit over a year ago. Have the team on the ground without much help from me, I have to admit, because like you said, I've been stuck in Perth for the last 2.5 years, but have done a fantastic job to to the point where, we're a couple of months off putting out our maiden resource at Sala, which for an area that was supposedly mined out is a magnificent achievement.
And obviously you mentioned that you've been back in Australia for the last few years until you've just obviously gone into Sweden again because of obviously what's been happening. How has the sort of projects moved forward with you being stuck in Australia, and how's that affected your progress? Could you have maybe speeded up things if you were on site, or has it been pretty good?
Well, I think it's actually worked extremely well, all things considered. And I mean, when I started with Alicanto, an old friend of mine, Eric Lundström, he's our chief geologist for Alicanto. He and I actually started as graduates for Boliden back in 1995. So we've kept in touch for a long time. And when we started talking about these opportunities way back in 2016, 2017. So Eric's based over here in Stockholm. I think he and I have become very adept at using Zoom or Skype for an hour or two every day. And, I guess it's worked extremely well. Us, with me over in Perth and the board over in Perth and Sydney, to be able to make sure that we can keep the funding up to what Eric and his team here in Sweden are doing. And it's actually worked extremely well. I mean, in essence, we've found historical records that have never been released to the public of, in the order of, I forget the number now, but some 20,000 meters of historical core. We've put our own sort of 14,000, 15,000 meters worth of drilling in over the last 12 months as well. And all of that I've been able to do obviously with Eric here and myself over in Sweden. So I think with today's technology, and as long as you've got the right team on the ground, anything's achievable.
Yeah, certainly. Sweden obviously has a reputation for being a pretty tough jurisdiction for getting projects off the ground. How have you found that, and have you experienced that with your projects?
Yeah, look, I've spent most of my career either in Sweden or Australia, and to be fair, Australia is probably one of the toughest jurisdictions in the world to get a mining project from zero to go. So Sweden's very similar. I mean, it has its own particular nuances with regards to some of the permitting and the time around the permitting, which I think a lot of companies have run foul of over the years. But I think with my experience and background, and as well as Eric's experience and background, we've managed to navigate our way through the majority of that over the last couple of years extremely successfully. What does that mean going forward? Look, I think there's actually a real quantum shift going on at the moment. I was just having a chat with one of the board members of Svermin, which is the sort of a lobby group, I guess you would call them, or a technical lobby group, which is over here in Sweden, that's helping the mining industry to really dig down and sort out a number of these issues and speed up the process for getting permits across the line. And we both agreed that just in the last 6 to 12 months there's been a massive shift in the attitude towards getting exploration and mining projects off the ground. I think there's been a fair amount of sort of lip service, or maybe not lip service is the wrong idea, but at the high levels of government, there's been a lot of promotional going on, to encourage investment into Sweden. But when you go down a little bit further, it gets quite difficult on an operations level to actually deliver. But I think that's been recognised now, and that's even starting to hit home with the bigger boys such as LKB and Boliden and Lundin. So there's a lot of pressure also coming back from those guys onto government to say, look, money's a very fickle thing. It will go, usually down the path of least resistance. So if you put too much red tape or green tape in front of projects, the money will just go elsewhere. And I think that's probably been, somewhat Sweden's experience over the last 10, 15 years. But, just the last 6, 12 months, we've had a number of projects such as the Kallak project for Beowulf has just been approved, in the last week. We've also had Botnia Exploration. I've had a project approved in the last couple of months, which, you know, it comes in line a little bit with a bit of a change in government circles as well, and an attitude towards things. But I think a lot of that's also been driven by I guess everyone's or government and have recognised that it's very dangerous for Sweden and any country really to be completely reliant upon the likes of China for their delivery of metals and you know, their supply chain. You know, that's even been driven home even further now with you know, the war that's going on between Russia and Ukraine. As sad as that is, but it's you know, all of a sudden everyone's going, my God, you know, where is our oil going to come from now? You know, and as you'd know, over there in London, you know, the Russians are supplying a huge amount of oil through to Europe. That's all just been cut off. So, you know, we have to come up with alternative sources. You know, with you know the critical metals list that you know that we have now, and in Europe, and the and all of the work that's required to meet the, you know, the zero carbon requirements that you know, countries such as Sweden have signed up to on the Paris Accord. You know, all of those sorts of issues is really sort of hitting home to everybody that, you know, we need to be in control of our destiny with regards to our ability to build whatever infrastructure we require, and consequently we're going to need metals and our own raw materials to actually achieve all of these things. If we're reliant upon somebody else, it's a big risk. So I think you sort of add all those things together. It's a bit of a long-winded answer, but, you know, I'm really starting to see a shift, and in now the conversations I'm having with people high up in government circles, and, you know, and those sorts of places, it's you know, it's really starting to change now, which is encouraging.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear as well. Obviously, your background is a mineral economist, as we mentioned. How do you see the sort of current situation with obviously just recent with COVID, but also now obviously the war between Ukraine and Russia? How would you say that's affected the business and I suppose the mining industry, and I suppose in relation to Sweden?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. That it's, you know, I've been in the industry for over 25 years now, and you know, we had a bit of they call it the mining super cycle, you know, that went from, well, supposedly started back in the early 2000s. We've had a big hiccup from sort of 2012 up until, you know, the last couple of years perhaps. But, you know, this just-in-time supply, which was a real buzzword a few years ago, you know, of people not having stockpiles. You know, even on the LME, you know, the stockpiles of available copper, you know, zinc, just the basics that we require for everyday life, that they're down to weeks and days, which is, you know, historically scary, very scary. You know, we're starting to see that being reflected in our in the metal prices, which I still think have a fair way to run. You know, obviously, it's not just the supply and demand that controls that. You know, there's a fair amount of politics that goes into all of those sorts of conversations as well. But, you know, I think, you know, I saw a very good, I read the letter the other day that BlackRock put out to their clients, you know, and he really reiterated that, you know, the end of, I guess the free trade around the world has come to an end as we know it now, and, you know, this real protectionism that's going to occur, where you know, countries are going to focus internally on their abilities to actually supply their raw materials into their supply chain, is going to become a major focus for a lot of countries. And, you know, I think Sweden's going to probably be sitting at the forefront of that, obviously already being, you know, the major supplier of iron ore, you know, very large supplier of copper, you know, those sorts of things, and having such a large endowment for quite a surprisingly small country in Europe, but with that huge, you know, technology base and well-educated populace and workforce that we have over here in Sweden. So, you know, I think there's, you know, for the likes of us that are, you know, trying to get exploration projects up off the ground and looking at opportunities that in the past were perhaps forgotten about or ignored, and you know, they are now coming back to the fore, especially when you as per the previous question, when you've got the perception that Sweden or a particular country, it's quite difficult to get a project permitted and up and running. Consequently, there's quite a number of these very high value projects, such as a Sala, which has just been sitting there ignored for over 100 years. So those sorts of opportunities are here, and we've been very fortunate to latch onto a couple and, moving forward at a huge rate of knots. So I think that, the next 5 to 10 years is going to be very exciting in the metal space. Absolutely.
Yeah. And do you think, obviously from going on from what you just said, do you think there is going to be a sort of a resurgence of mining within Europe and probably even more so the Scandinavian countries? I've done a few podcasts with a few companies out of Scandinavia, and there does seem to be a lot of potential, a lot of projects that were probably tucked away for tucked away for quite a few years, and now come to the forefront. So do you see a sort of resurgence in mining across Europe?
Oh, look, most definitely. I mean, Europe's they've spent the last 40, 50 years trying to get rid of mining projects, let's be fair. There's been a real bent towards trying to clean up the environment, and mining is bad, etc., which, to be fair, I've come out of Kalgoorlie in Western Australia, and as a kid, we had 6, 7 smelters within the town and used to ride to school, and you'd get the sulfur dioxide fumes down the back of your throat, which would then turn into sulfuric acid as you were driving to school, and you'd get this taste. But I've also grown up through all of those technologies being improved to the point where, all of those smelters are now gone. So the old ways of doing things are done. You can't do them that way anymore. So, my generation of engineers and executives that are coming through, we've seen the bad. We understand what it is that we need to do to do it the right way. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity to dust off a number of these, really, really interesting projects, and and get them up and running again, and even get back to grassroots exploration, which really hasn't been done for a long time. So look, I see massive opportunities in Europe. It's just a matter of not necessarily forgetting about the past, but moving on a little bit from the past and learning from all of the mistakes that have been made, and just making sure that the legislation is in place, and that as part of the permitting process, mining executives are held to the highest possible standards. And I think that the world, and especially Sweden, the Swedes are a very well educated people. They understand these things, and it's got to the point now where it's, like I said, we've spent 40, 50 years of getting rid of mines within Europe and just pushing them out to Africa and those sorts of places, out of sight, out of mind. But, the way that a lot of those sorts of, mines are, very unethical as far as the use of miners, or, in their environmental standards that they have to, which they aren't held to anything in some respects. But, we live in a global world. So, whatever happens in Africa, it's going to impact on what's happening over here in Sweden, in London, in Australia. So it's not just a matter of out of mind, out of sight. You have to do things to the highest possible standards, and I think that's what the whole conversation needs to change to that.
Yeah, certainly. Obviously, you're a seasoned professional with over 25, 30 years of experience across, obviously, multiple metals and jurisdictions. What would you say your favourite achievements have been in your journey?
Yeah, well, look, I think probably a couple. I mean, I really, when you're a young graduate and you go out, I got the opportunity to go out and work in Sweden. I went from positive 45 degrees on Boxing Day in Kalgoorlie in 1995 and landed up in Luleå at minus 30 degrees, about 2 weeks later. But as a 21-year-old, you've got no idea what to expect. You just turn up there, and I had the absolute time of my life. Made some fantastic friends that I still work with today, and keep in very good touch with today. So I think for me, you know, it's not necessarily an achievement, but it's something that I'm very proud of, the fact that I actually put myself out there to go off and do something like that as a young fella, as a young professional. But I think in more recent times, you know, I think I mentioned it before, you know, to be able to, you know, I think when I started for Mineral Resources, you know, it took me 49 days to get the first boat load from when I started to of 110,000 tonnes of spodumene. Was the first DSO ship load off to China, and then proceeded to make a ridiculous amount of money for Mineral Resources over about 12, 18 months before the price unfortunately collapsed back then. It's obviously come back significantly now, but you know, that was an amazing opportunity for me professionally to sort of be everything from the, you know, the resident manager to the surveyor, to the cook and the cleaner, and, you know, standing on top of Telstra Hill, it was called, which is a hill up the top of Wodgina, just directing traffic, and, you know, just to be able to do that. And I think back and, you know, on how we actually did it is actually quite amazing. But I think also, you know, what we've done with Sala is quite amazing. You know, I was having a good chat to Eric yesterday about these things, you know, and there's probably only 2 people in the world that could have pulled off what we're about to pull off with Sala, with both of our experiences on, you know, Eric being, you know, one of the top geos in Sweden, you know, myself with my background in Sweden, but also my links into Australia, and being able to provide the funding through to Eric, and then doing all of that remotely without being able to actually set foot in the country. You know, so I'm really looking forward to getting that maiden resource out and you know, and signing off on that side of achievement, and see where that goes from there. But you know, that's what's so fun about the mining industry. You just never quite know where you're going to go or where you're going to end up, but it's quite often fun.
Yeah, obviously talking about Sala, obviously you're heading towards your maiden resource there, and it's obviously been known for about 500 years, and was obviously thought to be exhausted. Obviously, you saw something at Sala that a generation of others may have not. How have you achieved what you've done? And like you said, you're probably the only probably people that could have pulled this off. Just wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sala. And funnily enough, I actually went down Sala about 25 years ago when I was here. We were working for Bull Leader, and my father came over to visit, and he was in charge of building the tourist mine over there in Kalgoorlie. And you know, so I was having a chat to a couple of the old boys, leaders of the Swedish mining industry, and I mentioned to him about what my father had done, and so he came over, and we actually all went down the old Sala mine. Like I said, 25 years ago, down to the bottom, and I think but there was about 6 or 7 of us, and even me as a 21-year-old, the average age was still about 75. But it was in the days before they'd put in the lift, so we all went down in these ladders, which was quite fun. But you know, down to some of the levels where it was all mined by basically fire setting. So they'd come up and they'd set a fire up against the wall, light it on fire, keep it going over the night, and then, you know, over that period, the walls would heat up and then crack, you know, and you'd maybe get about 10 centimetres worth of advance per day, which is the reason why it took 500 years to mine, right? But, you know, just the grades that they managed to pull out of that place, you know, it's like an average grade of 1,244 grams per tonne silver, which is, you know, you put that in perspective to today's mine, and there's nothing comes even close. So I always sort of had it in the back of my mind that this would be a good one to come back and take a look at. Look, Sweden's an interesting place as far as opportunities like that. There are quite a few of these type of opportunities around, and for whatever reason, whether or not it's, you know, a poor reputation because of permitting, or you know, people haven't had that much success over here. I think if you can get around those particular issues, which we obviously have here, you know, there's some amazing opportunities to develop. But I mean, it's also important to be able to fund all of these things. So I think that's, you know, I guess obviously with my last 25 years, 30 years worth of experience in the industry, and you know, and the people that I know, and being able to raise funds, and, you know, just like I said, to put Eric and I together with Eric's expertise and my ability to get the money together, and the people over on the Australian side, it just really made sense to have a look at this a little bit deeper. I mean, we knew there was some historical information, but I guess that's another nuance about Swedish projects, where they changed the law in 1992. And in 1992, prior to 1992, you actually needed to be a Swede or a Swedish company to own assets within Sweden, or with own tenements. But it also meant that when they changed that law, they negotiated. I presume it was Boliden and LKAB negotiated that any exploration data that they had from prior to 1992, they were not legally obliged to provide that through to the government. So whereas like in Western Australia, or in Australia as a whole, you can go back into the databases, you can go back 100 years and you'll find information, but you get to the database over here in Sweden, which is very good with the Swedish Geological Society, but you go prior to 1992 and information starts to become very hard to find. So you need to have that you need to know who to ask to get that information, and between Eric and myself, we've been very fortunate to be able to pull a lot of this information that we knew some of it existed, but we've actually been blown away by how much we found. And it's saved us, it saved us probably 25,000 meters worth of drilling, which is quite amazing. I mean, when you put that into a dollar sense, we're talking, geez, I don't even know what that's worth, probably $6-7 million for our shareholders that we don't need to raise. So I think when you put it all into those sorts of put all that information together, you can sort of understand how we've come about the solution and the opportunity, first of all, at Sala, and then how we've managed to get to where we are today. So I think it's amazing achievement.
Yeah. So if overseas companies were looking to go into mining in Sweden, how is it to mine in Sweden with obviously mining regulations, governments, local communities, etc., workforces? Just wondering if you give us a general overview if someone from overseas was looking to explore in Sweden.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, there are a lot of roadblocks, right, that you have to figure out yourself how to get around and get over the top of. And when you first go in there, you can sort of see, oh, wow, there's so many fantastic opportunities here. I can't believe that they're still sitting there. But sometimes there's a reason why these things are still sitting there, and people haven't been able to get over the roadblocks. But each part of the country is different. Some of them take longer. Some of them are very quick. Like Sala has been amazingly quick for us to be able to get hold of the historical information. Had a lot of support from the local government and the mines inspectorate on getting our approvals through on a timely basis. Stakeholders are actually very interested. So the local people are very interested in what we're doing. But I guess we're lucky in some respects because they've got a long history there of having a mine within the town. There's still an operating limestone mine that sits right there in the town as well. So it's not a foreign idea for the local population to sort of see mining trucks running around and miners running around, and it's the whole value that actually adds to the local community is massive. If and when we get Sala up and running, there's the potential for 300-400 jobs, which for a small town like Sala with a few thousand inhabitants, that's a huge bonus to the local economy, and just a huge number of jobs. Not to mention the direct jobs, but also the follow-on jobs for families that are going to move there. And they'll bring kids. You need teachers. You need shops, etc., etc. So and we're looking at a potential mine there that's going to be, in my mind, we're looking at 10 years plus, depending obviously on how we go with our future exploration programs. But it's somewhat buyer beware, I suppose, is the best way I would describe Sweden. So do your own research. But I mean, Australia's no different. Which is that we've become very used to or adept in working our way through all the process and all the permitting, and it just becomes part of the job. Here, Sweden, we haven't quite got to that level of experience, and that's probably got more to do with the sheer volume of projects. Like in Australia, we've got hundreds of mining projects and exploration projects, if not thousands, around the country, so it's, and I can remember over the last 20 years talking to people about how frustrating it is in Australia just to do something, because there's a bat over here, or there's a particular flower that's, highly protected, but, I think that's all fair enough. That's the way that it should be. And I think Sweden's just sort of coming up to, for once that I've actually seen now, Sweden's actually a little bit behind Australia in that regard. Usually Sweden's 10 to 20 years ahead of basically everything that Australia does. But I think in this situation, it's a bit behind, but that's where the opportunities lie. You can't go to exactly the same places where everybody else is, because all the good stuff's already gone. So therein lies the opportunity.
Yeah, certainly. A couple more questions. What advice can you give sort of upcoming mining professionals? Obviously, you've been experienced and you've obviously travelled around the world. What advice would you say that you think would be beneficial to some of our younger audience listening to this episode?
Yeah, look, just get out there and have a go, I think. I mean, let's be honest, when you're that age, you don't really know much. So, it's all about getting out there and learning from guys like myself that have been around a while, that have seen it, been there, done that. But in saying that, go out there and beat your own path as well. Go off, and I think it's really about trying to differentiate yourself from others with your experience and your knowledge. And that's, you just never know when opportunities are going to come about because of that particular differentiation that you've given yourself. But in saying that as well, as professionals, you're going to get involved in different things as you go through your career. I think back in my early days, I was very interested in the technical side of things, and quite keen to learn about that, but very quickly got pushed into management and saw a whole different world again. But there's no reason why you can't do both as a professional. And to be fair, I like to see a lot of the professionals coming through, really get an opportunity to concentrate on their technical side of what they're doing. I was very fortunate with Boliden to spend 2-3 years on the explosive side of things, and got to run around to all of their operations in Sweden and Spain and a few other places, and just really learn about rocks, and how to blow them up, as exciting as that sounds. But and don't be discouraged. I think with you're going to have downturns, you're going to have upturns, but just go out there and push yourself, and preferably do a lot of that sort of stuff before you get married. Because I think once you get married, the handbrake tends to come on a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose I speak to obviously a lot of younger engineers in the industry, and I think sometimes it's just stepping outside your comfort zone. No one always knows what's going to be happening in the future. But it's putting yourself in those situations, and if opportunities are presented to yourself, if it's something you want to do, grasp it with both hands. And learn.
Go out bush. Go out to the weirdest possible places that you've never heard of. Like I went out to the foot of the mountains in between Sweden and Norway, about 1,000 kilometers north of Stockholm, which you almost can't get any further away than that from Western Australia. But absolutely loved it. One of the most beautiful places that I've ever been to, where they had a mine. So, and I often think back about that, about how lucky I actually was to get that opportunity.
Yeah, and I suppose no doubt you would have picked up certain skills there that you probably wouldn't have picked up elsewhere, and that's just obviously additional skills that you would have learned for being in that position that you might have not gone learned from other mines or other local jurisdictions. So yeah, it is putting yourself out there, like you said, and every experience, take something from it. Whether it's a good experience or bad experience, if you can take something away from it, that's just going to obviously increase your skill level and adaptability.
100%. Yep. No, yeah. Totally agree.
And lastly, what's the outlook for the rest of the year for you guys?
Yeah, so look, we're very busy. So we've got 3 drill rigs spinning at the moment. We're just about to cut off the the resource drilling program. Doesn't mean that we're going to stop. We're going to keep going as we push beyond the maiden resource. We've got a lot of modelling work that we're going on at the moment. A lot of Eric and his team are out there trying to figure out the geological model, exactly why things have happened and where they are and where they're going, and trying to figure out where the higher grade portions are. We have our third-party engineers that are starting on the maiden resource modelling. That'll start in a couple of weeks' time. So we're going to be really busy through until charging all the way through to the end of May, I think, before we can perhaps take half a breath and a step back and go, yep, okay, well, that's what we've achieved. But yeah, we won't be slowing down from there, I don't think. It's going to be a matter of, we'll be banking, the maiden resources so that everybody can take a look at that and go, all right, well, that's, whatever that value is going to be, and then compare that to our market capitalisation, and hopefully our share price will get to where it's supposed to be. And, but then it's all about, well, what's coming next? That's the hard part about being in the junior sphere. Investors are always craving the next announcement, when the next piece of amazing news is going to come across their desk, so that the share price keeps going up. It doesn't unfortunately always work out that way, but yeah, a lot of work going on. Hopefully I can get back to Sweden a little bit more than what I have been over the last couple of years. I'm back off to Perth Sunday, I believe. So I'll be back next week, and then so hopefully I don't think it'll be too long before I'm back in Sweden again, giving Eric a hand. Yeah, certainly. Well, Peter, really wish you all the best for the year. Obviously, exciting opportunity you've got there, and like you said, you're just going to keep pushing along. Obviously, results will be up and down, but you'll get there in the end. And what an amazing project, and it seems in a very nice part of the world. So yeah, wish you well in your success, and maybe come on later this year or next year and give us an update. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah. If our audience wants to reach out to you, if they've got any questions or wants to find out more information around maybe mining in Sweden, or get an update from yourselves, how can they go about doing that? Are you crossing any social media platforms? Your best thing to do is to go onto our website. We've got a huge amount of information on our website. We've also got emails in there for how to get in contact with us. So yeah, no, by all means, send an email through, and I'll do my best to give you the best answer I can. Yeah. And are you on Twitter, YouTube, any of those social media platforms? Oh yeah, we're all over Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and all of those sorts of things. They're very easy to find. Yeah, no worries. Well, appreciate your time again. And those that are listening, appreciate if you can obviously follow Peter and his journey. And if you've obviously got any questions, feel free to reach out to him and his company. Also, appreciate if you can share this episode with others, especially if they're in Europe, whether they're in sort of Norwegian countries, or Scandinavian countries, or whether in Europe. But appreciate if you can your continued support, and appreciate you sharing these episodes amongst others in the industry, so they can understand what else is happening within the mining industry. And obviously we don't get many people on the podcast that are developing projects in Sweden. So yeah, appreciate your continued support. And until next time, happy mining.